All right, my name is Michael Easley, and I'm going to take a few minutes to go over some diversity issues. Obviously, the name of my lesson is Solving Diversity Issues in the Classroom. One thing I believe educators must grow as diversity grows. Diversity is going to continue to grow. It is growing at a rapid pace. That's not something that's going to slow down. So one thing educators must do, they must constantly reassess teaching methods. I think professional development for teachers to function effectively in a highly diverse environment is crucial. I don't think that teachers are able to grow unless they're constantly looking at what they're doing and how they can get better at it. Sometimes that's just changing up, how you communicate with certain students or how you administer certain assessments or, how you're breaking down information for them as you present it to them. So right here, I'm going to go over a 5-step process that I think should help as far as, diversity goes and shrinking some of those diversity issues that a lot of people have in the classrooms. Step 1 is building trust. I think everybody knows, every educator knows you have to build trust with your students to be able to get more out of them as a student. They're going to give you more the more they trust you. And I think that's the goal of every educator. One stat that was surprising to me when doing my research was 90% of United States public school teachers are white. Most of them grew up and attended school in middle-class, English-speaking, predominantly white communities. Most received their teacher preparation in predominantly white colleges and universities. So, learning that or seeing that stat, it's really not a mystery as to why some white educators just don't have the background to handle diverse classrooms or diverse communities. And it just comes back to the educational background. If they would have had a different educational background, would they be better prepared for the growing diversity of their students? Because again, like I just said earlier, diversity is rapidly growing and it's not going to stop. The first priority, in the trust phase and building trust is to acknowledge this challenge in a positive, inclusive, and honest way. That is one thing it's one thing as a teacher to say, okay, I have to become more diversity friendly in my lessons. I've got to find ways to reach kids that are, come from different cultural backgrounds, and that are more diverse than what I was taught or how I was taught or what I got brought up in. So, it's one thing to say that, though. It's another thing to attack that, to attack that challenge in a positive way, in an inclusive way, and being honest with kids. You've got to go in as an educator, and you've really got to make sure that as you're planning, this is something you really want to do, and you're positive about it. Because if you're not wanting to do this, you're not going to be positively about it, and it's going to come out in your lessons at some point. So I think acknowledge this challenge that you're taking on being more diverse, and make it a positive, and make sure you're doing it in a positive way and being very inclusive with it, and like I said, just being honest. One thing I believe in, leadership starts at the top. And because of this, I think administrators should give examples of inclusion and non-judgmental discussion, reflection, engagement strategies to teachers. And that way teachers can use them and hopefully help establish positive learning communities within their classroom. I think a key outcome in the trust phase is to demonstrate difficult topics can be discussed in an environment that's honest, safe, and productive. That is one thing that, as an educator, you have to be able to, when they come in that classroom, among different subject levels, there are going to be difficult topics to discuss. And you as a teacher, you have to set your classroom, you have to set the boundaries, and you have to set that environment to where all students, not just a portion of them, but all students feel honest and safe and productive, or they feel the environment is honest and safe and productive to where they can honestly talk about these topics and discuss them. And and to get something out of them. Because if a kid does not feel safe in their environment, they're just going to shut down, and they won't be engaging in conversations. And at the end of the day, if that really just defeats the purpose, if that's what kind of environment you have. One thing I think is that is crucial is, address the issues. Don't worry about being politically correct. It is more important for a teacher. Again, you've already set the environment, set the tone for the environment. It is more crucial for a teacher to address the issues instead of being politically correct, because at the end of the day, if you're not being honest and you're not addressing the issues of whatever it may be, whatever your classroom may be, then what good is being politically correct going to do? Your students are not getting anything from it, and as a teacher, you're just not being honest with your students. Step 2 is engaging personal culture. This has to start with educators before it can begin to take place within students. You have to. One thing I found during research is this was a good quote. It said, or not necessarily a quote, but it was a good section in an article I was reading. It said educators must build their cultural competence, which is defined as their ability to form authentic and effective relationships across differences. Now, again, you've got to get to know your students, like the next bullet says, but within that, you've got to understand where those kids come from. Me as a white male, I've got to understand the difference in my kids' culture when they don't come from a place that's exactly like me. I've got, I'll just use a sports as an example. I have, a football team that is made up of probably 75 to 80% non-white players. I'm also coaching in a town or at a school that the town that it's in or the city that's in, there are some low-income places. There's some low-income areas, and we have a lot of kids from low-income areas. Our school is over 76% free and reduced lunch, so that kind of gives you an idea of our poverty level. For me to understand where they come from and to understand what they're dealing with when they go home at nights, whether it's their clothes not getting washed or them not getting supper or something to that effect, I've got to understand that. And I can't do that if all I do is teach kids the same way that I was taught or use the strategies that worked on me. I can't just turn around and use those same strategies on them and methods on them, because at the end of the day, our cultures are completely different. Where we come from is completely different. So I can't use that. It's just I'm not going to get the same result as my teachers got with me. I'm just not going to get the same result with my students. So I've got to get to know every student and understand where they come from independently to be able to understand, their personal culture. I think that is crucial. At the end of the day, students want to know that, a couple things, but they want to know that their teachers care for them, they respect them, and they care about them as people. And I'm not just talking about caring for them like I said, that first quote right there, caring for them. They've got to care about them as people, about where they come from, the culture they grew up in, where they're, what their home life is like. That's the stuff you've got to know, that you've got to care about them. If a kid knows that you truly do care about what happens to them when they leave those school grounds after 3 o'clock, I think you're going to get a lot more out of that kid, and you're going to have a better relationship, student-teacher relationship with them because of that. And again, that just goes back to engaging that. As a teacher, though, you've got to engage that. Multiple factors is going to affect a kid's motivation and performance. Feelings of belonging. Every kid wants to feel like they belong, regardless of what setting they're in. They've got to trust the people around them. We touched on that already. It really goes back to step 1, is building that trust. And they've got to have a belief that they value the intellectual competence. Students have to believe that the teachers care not only they don't want to know, they can't say, hey, I just want Jimmy Joe right there to have an A. Jimmy Joe's got to know that teacher truly cares about them having that good grade or having that A or doing well. This step 3 is confronting social dominance and social justice. This is probably the hardest, I would say, for most people. Um, you know, I think educators have to directly confront the current and historical inequities that affect education. Um, there's nothing wrong with engaging your class in conversation about race or class or gender or sexual orientation or immigration or any kind of other dimension of diversity and social dominance. I think, again, it goes back to what we talked about in step 2 about creating that safe environment to where all opinions are welcome, and people from opinions from people from different cultures are also welcome. But that's something that and this is I think for me personally, this is probably sometimes the toughest. And so you've got to examine how issues of privilege and power, dominance might be functioning in their school to shape educators' assumptions and beliefs about the students. You know, a student may think that student A over here might feel like student B or he might feel like student B got an A on a test just because he's a certain color. Or because because that student has a certain privilege, or as he thinks that student has a certain privilege. But at the end of the day, you've got to reshape how that kid thinks and make him understand. Okay, that kid right there, student B, he got that good grade on the test because he worked hard. He's not any more privileged than you are. So, getting kids to understand that, I think, is very hard. So you really touching on the privilege thing and power. A lot of kids from different cultures equate certain skin color with power, or certain money, or financial, your place financially to skin color, or it could be lack of the skin color. And that's something that I think that's the kind of stuff that you can't be afraid as a teacher to bring up. Hey, who feels like this, and tell me why. All right, what can we do to reverse these these negative thoughts about that, and what can we do if sometimes the student may be right. A kid may, student, I think sometimes kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They may look at something and see, hey, they got a privilege just because of the skin color. Well, let's go break that down and let's find out how. So that's the tough questions that's the tough topics you got to bring up sometimes, and make them think, make kids think critically. That goes into, some educators must first think critically by examining, the factors of identity such as race, ethnicity, language, religion, values, and vocation. Put the students in the same scenario and allow them to think critically. What would you give up as a student? The most interesting one is, a group of white teachers in Minneapolis was asked, what would you give up of these? And 90% said their race to be able to keep the others. You know, as kids, what do they value? Would they give up their race, or would they give up their religion, or would they give up their values? What would they, give up? So I think getting students to think critically is something that's a good way of addressing this. Phase 4 is transforming instructional practices. I think this is kind of the one where it's kind of cut and dry, a little bit more cut and dry. You got to assess where you're going, how you're doing stuff. Like it says right here, transform the way they carry out instruction to become more, responsive to diversity. You got to do that as an educator. You got to find ways to use curriculum that honors each student's culture and life experience. You must shift instructional strategies to meet the diverse learner needs of students, and you've got to communicate, respect for each student's intelligence. You got to hold consistent high expectations for all leaders. You just, at the end of the day, you got to stop blaming students and their families for gaps and say, all right, I'm going to ignore that. At the end of the day, I just want change, and educators must be willing to change. And last is step 5, engaging the entire school community. Changing demographics are going to affect school systems, for the rest of eternity. So we've got to create a more welcome learning environment for diverse students and their families. Create workshops and help non-teacher employees acknowledge their powerful role in welcoming students. You got bus drivers, you got central office people, office people, you got lunchroom. Any people you see like that, they need to be involved in this. Bus drivers gaining, skills for managing how they interact with kids each day. Language barriers are huge. So These are my 5 steps, and I hope somebody got something out of this.